Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I am Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to have Dr. Dawna Ballard joins us as our distinguished guest on today's episode. Before we begin, allow me to introduce our guest for today's episode. Dr. Dawna Ballard is a professor of organizational communication and technology in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, a leading scholar in Chronemics, the study of how time shapes human communication. Her work explores how our experience of time influences the pace, effectiveness, and long term vitality of individuals, teams, and organizations. In her book, Time by Design, How Communicating Slow Allows Us to Go Fast, published by MIT Press, she introduced the concept of chronemic design, offering a compelling framework for intentionally shaping time through communication. Drawing on research across diverse industries, she shows how strong relationships can become a powerful driver for speed and performance, and provides practical tools to apply these insights in everyday work. Dr. Ballard is deeply committed to research that creates real world impact. Her work has earned multiple honors, including the 2025 David Mayers Research Award for her collaborative study on unhurried conversations in healthcare. She is a Public Voices Fellow, a research collaborator with Mayo Clinic, and serves on the board of directors of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas. Her ideas have reached wide audiences through outlets such as the New York Times, Time, The Atlantic, Fortune, and Forbes, as well as platforms like Access SW and Creative Mornings. An active member of leading communication associations, she also teaches and mentors students in areas of spanning chronemics, group communication, and organizational life, earning multiple awards for her excellence in teaching and student engagement. Today, Dr. Dawna Ballard discusses her book, Time by Design, How Communicating Slows Allows Us to Go Fast, exploring how individuals, teams, and organizations can intentionally communicate more slowly to achieve faster and more meaningful outcomes, and how time itself can be thoughtfully designed to enhance the way we work and collaborate. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dawna Ballard to the podcast. Dr. Dawna, we deeply appreciate your acceptance of our invitation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation to be here.
Thank you. Professor, you argue that speed is not simply a time-based issue, but a
Mhm.
function of chronemics, the relationship between time and communication. Can you walk us through what that means in practical terms?
Absolutely. So the idea of speed sort of in an industrial vacuum, and the idea that from an industrial perspective, we think a lot about work and speed in the way that we think of machines, which a machine is faster if you just, have more machines, if you have, if you set the machine to go faster. But when you're dealing with people, so like a computer, you can make a computer, like you can continue to build and computers can go faster, conveyor belts, any number of things. But when people are the the engine of the work, well, people are different. And so there's a non-linearity to the way that time and communication work. So with communication, what often allows us to get up to speed and to be faster, there is a early investment in what I call a relational infrastructure, so that you and I, we're just meeting today for the first time. And if we were planning to do a long-term project, we would need to meet and, collaborate over a period of time before we really got to know how the other works, the approaches the other takes, our blind spots, all of that, building even a sense of our lives that even drive our work, all of these sorts of things. And so, whether you're a morning person or a night person, all of these things, but it would take time and it would be slow in the beginning for us to build a relationship that then allowed us to ultimately then go fast. So when our closest collaborators, we know how they work, we know how they think, we know all of these sorts of even things about their personal lives, which allow us to work together better. We can compensate for any things that we think could stand in the way of the work, and it just takes time. So speed is nonlinear in human relationships and when you're dealing with people and communication. That's essentially what it means.
Professor, in your book, you identify two distinct communication design logics, fast
Yes.
and slow. How do these contrasting approaches actually show up in everyday workplace interactions?
Okay. So then extend that conversation about speed. So fast communication design logics, those there's sort of two places for fast communication design. It's one for urgent situations where a lot of context is not needed. So calling a 911 operator, well, that would be in the US, but let's say calling emergency services, that, emergency services, they don't need to know a lot about your working style. They don't need to know any of that. They just need to know in this moment, what do you need? And so they can then quickly dispatch an ambulance or a fire truck, whatever, to your home. To like that is fast, sort of just on its own. The other place where you see fast communication design logics is in the places that I mentioned. So with our research collaborators or our collaborators in the workplace, the fast, and I give this example of teams that we studied with the children's advocacy centers. You mentioned I'm on the board there. That came about based upon having studied this organization almost a decade earlier, where 5 to 10 years earlier, where we got to see they wanted to know which teams are most effective. And for them, speed was a big part of being effective. So these are teams designed to support children who might be in abusive situations in their homes or anywhere, just who have been reported as being abused. And so you have this multidisciplinary team of, child protection services, law enforcement, prosecutors, therapists. So all of these different people whose job it is to secure the safety of that child and then potentially um, prosecute any perpetrators and just basically keep this child safe and well for the rest of his or her life. Well, when they asked and were looking to, well, which of the teams essentially are fastest in this way of they can get this done because time matters, like the sensitivity of being quick to do this is very important to being able to do it well. We found that they were the teams who knew each other and had invested time through showing up for what are called case reviews, where they just reported on the various cases they were managing, but they had shown up time and time again, versus so this is at a certain level, it sounds a bit like a fast communication design logic, but this is actually an example of a slow communication design logic. So what we found is these teams used both. So in order to report the child abuse cases, fast design logics were most important. And so that was having an emergency services caller. They had a hotline. So there was their fast. The slow communication design logic that allowed them to have speed to address this in a time sensitive fashion was the slow investment in relationships that spanned, you know, weeks, months, years. And we found that with these teams, everyone didn't have to have known each other for a long time. That wasn't the predictor. It was whether the teams prioritized sitting down to talk about their cases, even when there wasn't necessarily anything urgent in that moment, but it was through the showing up in the slow, the mundane times, but having that commitment to their long-term effectiveness. That is actually what allowed them to have a more time sensitive response, or to have more speed in their work. Did that clarify the fast and slow
Yes.
design logic? Okay.
Yeah, actually. Professor described fast communication as linear and transnational, while slow communication is non-linear and transcendent. What does it mean for time in interaction to be transcendent rather than transnational?
Oh, okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks for that question. So if we take those teams, and I'll use that as an example here as well, the transactional fast, there were lots of teams who ended up being less effective, who really thought, well, if I don't have a case that's coming up in this particular meeting, um, I don't need to be there. Or like if my case isn't going to trial right now, say if you're a prosecutor and you say, well, I have these other things to do. I'm busy doing these other things. So I'll just wait until I really need this team. And so it will basically be like a transaction, so that, say, a prosecutor would say, I'm going to just call this team member. Maybe it was a child protective services member. I'll call that team member when I need them. So that's a transaction. The idea that I have this thing that I know I need and it's time sensitive, and here's the person who I think has the information. And so we're just making a transaction for, my interest in this case and your value in it. And so I'll call you, and then you can share what you have, and then I can go on. And that would be faster in their mind, right? In a very linear sense. It's very like, okay, that does seem faster. And and I get that it's sort of goes against kind of your instinct. If you are looking for speed, it goes against the idea that you would go and sit in a meeting when you don't know if there's anything in this meeting that's going to be of help to you and what you need to do, because you have all of these urgent demands. And so, in contrast to that transactional approach that some people would take, other people would take, and we have both the interview data, and we have a lot of survey data. So we have, over 1,000 different people involved in the study. And they explained that often they wouldn't know whether a particular case review meeting was going to be valuable, but they know that the design of this model is to show up. So they would just show up, right? So we're just going to follow the model, and we're going to show up to this case review meeting. And they said that they were always shocked at how they learned things that they weren't looking for, that weren't even necessarily tied to their case in the moment, but they got to hear things about a case in another city, for example, that actually had some relevance to a question they had, and that they were always learning things that they didn't realize they needed to know just by showing up. And so that's transcendent. That means that that what we're getting out of this relationship can't be known in advance. That it transcends what we think of in this transactional approach to, oh, do I need this person? Do I not? That actually, if I just show up consistent with the design of this approach, if I just show up and I listen, and I maybe ask a question, but maybe I just listen, that what I get out of it transcends what I could have known. And so transcendence is tied to just this deep belief that people and our interactions, they can always matter, and that I can't always know what it is I need in a given moment. And so that a transactional approach is always going to lead to poor information, poor relationships than if I just show up. And again, it wasn't like they were meeting daily. These were people who were skipping meetings where the meeting might have only been once a month, right? And so just even in that monthly meeting, they're getting more and getting ahead and having more effective outcomes because they showed up versus people who wouldn't take the time because they felt like at a transactional level, I don't need anything from this meeting, from you, from these people at this time.
Professor, many leaders assume that slowing down automatically waste of time or reduces productivity. What's the biggest misconception people have about communicating slowly and how do you address it?
Okay. Could you repeat the first part of your question?
Sure. Many leaders assume that slowing down automatically wastes time or
Yes.
reduces productivity.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the misconception is understandable because when you're under-resourced and when you feel like things are moving quickly and you cannot devote additional time beyond what is necessary, and that's a very understandable cycle to get caught in. But the thing that they're not understanding about it really goes back to relationships, and that relationships, if we think about relationships with anyone that we know that they become more efficient over time. And so that the building in this time with others to get to know them will ultimately make things smoother. It minimizes misunderstandings. There's just so many levels at which understanding or having to let go of what our fundamental assumptions are is really important. And people have told us in that study, they said it's like a catch 22. There's this idea of some things you have to experience it to believe it. And so we can all think of an example that people might be able to relate to that isn't even related to teams, but has to do with just going slow to go fast is downtime. Is we might believe that working more uh, in a linear fashion will lead to more productivity. But we know that, humans, even though machines break down in a way where you could still maybe have that fixed quickly, or you could replace it with a new machine. With people, it takes a lot longer. We don't want people to break down, but that people have a limit. There's a lot of research that shows that of an 8-hour workday, people are really available and alert to be productive for much less, a range of that, but never the full 8 hours. And so taking, time off once a week, getting a full night's sleep, there's all sorts of ways in which we know even if we feel a lot of urgency, we know that we're better after coming back from a break. We're better after a full night's sleep. And so this this is an example that just across industries that people can experience and realize, yes, I actually can be better, faster, more if I also have some downtime where I slow and I'm not as productive. So and that goes back to the nonlinearity.
Professor, research shows that effective teams use slow communication to achieve speed. Can you share a concrete example from your work where this paradox played out in an organization?
Okay. Okay. So we'll think about, well, I've given several concrete examples of where that plays out. I'll give it from a different one. So we've also done a lot of research on unhurried conversations, and that's actually ongoing. And so this is between a clinician and a patient. So, any sort of doctor, nurse, physician assistant, and the patient. And so what we find and what we call an unhurried conversation doesn't mean that the conversation takes a lot of time. So we looked at a sample. So there was from a corpus of about 5,000 recorded clinician-patient interactions. We looked at some various metrics and found like 100 that were similar in every regard that we could in terms of the same amount of time, similar kinds of cases, and that our independent coders, so the team came together to develop, well, what are the dimensions of an unhurried conversation? So we noticed just through some of the early exploratory work, well, we noticed they have open body language. There's pauses. They don't deflect emotion, but they respond when someone else is talking about emotion. They if they interrupt, it's only to get more information, but they don't interrupt to move on. So there's a series of measures that we said, okay, this appears to be what marks an unhurried conversation. And we then trained coders independently who then looked at these 100 cases and reliably, despite whatever the length of the consultation, the doctor's appointment was, people could tell the difference between a hurried and an unhurried interaction. And that research shows that when patients feel heard, when they aren't rushed, and again, it's in the same amount of time. So we don't mean, oh, you just have to take more time and then outcomes will be better. We mean that even within the same amount of time, if you connect with people in particular ways so that they feel that they have the ability to ask questions, to share information, that in all of these scenarios, people have um, patients report better outcomes. And the other thing, and we're looking at into studying this in our ongoing research, and we have other evidence, and I wrote about another study in the book, that doctors also feel better, are less prone to burnout, are more resilient when they aren't having hurried conversations where they can't focus in, they can't pay attention, then where they get to actually just participate in the moment without thinking and rushing on to the next thing.
Focus you emphasize that relationships can serve as a lever for speed. How does investing time in relationship early on actually accelerate outcomes later in the process?
Okay, so I'll give now another example from the book related to the medical setting. This isn't the unhurried conversations at the Mayo Clinic, but this was through another collaboration here with UT and UC San Francisco. And my collaborator, Dr. Irmamala Sakar, she had developed a relationship with a particular patient. And it's actually what started the study, or one of the early conversations we had that made us realize we really need to study this further, is she had developed a relationship with a colleague or with a patient. And when the patient came in for their annual appointment, she realized that something was different. And so she and her health was also declining, and it wasn't quite clear why. And she found out that the patient actually through just, because she knew this patient. So this is the lever for speed. Because she knew this patient, she could rather quickly tell something was wrong. And it turns out that they had some problems in their personal life and were experiencing depression. And so she was able to very quickly size that up. Whereas if she hadn't spent the investment over time with this woman, she wouldn't have been able to see that there is something. And then because depression, particularly this was an older person, it can be such a complication to so many other medical conditions that they have. And so this is one way to actually support, or was to support, this patient in her health, and to manage her health, or to maintain her health, is through recognizing something changed. I think someone in their family might have died. And so this is the kind of thing I mean by a lever for speed, is that she could spot it very quickly.
Professor, the book offers a practical toolkit for using fast and slow chronemic designs in complementary fashion. What does this integration look like when teams are facing urgent, time-sensitive demands?
Great. Okay. I'll use another example of how that looks that's not in the book, just to kind of vary it up. But that it means that when a and actually I talk about Agile uh in the book, and so we might think of an Agile team. And so the complementarity that people don't often realize is that Agile, the focus of that project management approach is actually lots of face-to-face time, lots of early communication in a way that kind of maybe it takes more time, slower, what we would call slower. And that the complementarity is that if early on in a project development you are meeting face to face, you're asking questions, you're talking, you're iterating, you're looking into multiple options, that when it's time to bring the product to market, and this is why it's called Agile, why it's faster, is that it allows you to more quickly address and make changes because of all of the upfront time spent in the early phases of a project. So that's a complementarity where we have this urgent time sensitive demand of getting, obviously we always are wanting to be ahead of our competitor. And so if we in those early phases of design around iteration and ideation, if we take more time, then we actually can be more effective and faster than if we haven't had those conversations, if we haven't had the face-to-face meetings, if we hadn't talked about it as much up front, it would be much slower to fix things on the back end.
Professor, you mentioned that fast becomes addictive because there's always something next. How can individuals and organizations break free from this cycle of constant urgency?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I mentioned that it is very counterintuitive when you are in a place of needing, if speed is central to your work, it is very counterintuitive to think about diverting from this very short term, linear, fast transactional approach. And so the thing that I suggest is look at, and to break free from the cycle of urgency, look at and think about what is your product that you're really delivering, or your service. What ultimately is the communication process that supports it? So whatever it is that you're doing, what is the actual communication process that you're needing to support in order to have a time sensitive response to whatever your organization faces. And so if we step back and really think about, okay, relationships with the client is probably central to the kind of thing that we need in order to do our work, then just refocusing. So, one of the simple ways to break free is to not think simply about the outcome, which is what we usually do. When we're caught in a cycle of urgency, we're really focused on the outcome. And we're like, oh my gosh, we need to get to that place, and we need to get there as fast as possible. If you flip it and you think about, well, what's the process that that allows us to get to that outcome, and we focus and we pour our attention and our time into that process, it allows us to then to feel and to understand that we are supporting whatever that urgent issue is. We're supporting it through strengthening this foundation that allows us to get there. So in the case of Agile, it's the relationships and knowing what the client needs. That's the thing that allows us to shift from the addiction to just the outcome, which is the software. If we're talking about doctor patient interactions, we do, getting to multiple patients is one of the outcomes we need. But if we focus on, well, the process is, if we can be attentive in the 10 or 15 minutes that we have, and really really focus in what's needed and not rush this 10 to 15 minutes, then we will be building something that allows us to get through to more patients. If it's in the case with the children's advocacy centers, and we know that we are under, and these are public servants, so they're very unfortunately under resourced. We know that there's lots of children who need our support, but if we only focus on there and don't think about, wow, our relationships as a team actually is what allows us to get to this end goal, then that also allowed people to break free from that addiction to just the speed. It's just through reframing and refocusing. And I talk a lot about where we focus in any given moment shapes what we're going to decide is the problem and the solution.
Professor, your recent research on unhurried conversations in healthcare earned the 2025 David Mayer's Research Award. How do the principles of chronemic design apply specifically in high-stakes, fast-paced environments like medicine?
Oh, yes. So so I have been really honored that some of the people who really get the work, and I've been doing a lot of different things in medicine, because it's the classic case of speed matters, and we're dealing with people. And whenever we're dealing with people, relationships also matter. So, how can we manage both relationships and the speed that's necessary? And so, the principles of chronemic design that apply in those environments is, one is like focusing on the process. What's the communication process that needs your attention? It's remembering that time in relationships isn't linear, that it's not that every minute of the day or every minute of an event is the same. It's completely non-linear, and sometimes matter more, and an investment up front matters more. It's remembering that transactional interactions are fine as long as they've also been built through, like, that we can get to. And so in that case, so that I don't want it to seem like, well, only slow communication design is important, but in medical settings, when you've done the investment through the slow communication design, then and the transcendence and sitting with patients when you have more time, then when there is a quick response that's needed, you can get to that basic transaction. What do I need? And so one of my collaborators or my the doctor who really his whole the whole idea of unhurried conversations, that's his brainchild that he had developed over years in practice, like in clinical settings, realizing that it wasn't, he always says it's not about taking more time or making the patient wait. It's about what's needed in a given moment. What's the rhythm that's needed? And sometimes you just need a very quick response. And so that's one of the others. And then the last is one of the other principles is whether we're looking at multiple time frames or one. So are we looking at past, present, future? Because if in a medical setting, we really need to have some understanding of past, what is this patient's, not only their medical history, but personal history as well. What and in the future, what are their goals? And so the patient revolution that I write about in the book that Victor founded, they even have little like cards that patients can, they're on their website, and you can print out cards to take with you to the doctor so that you make sure certain issues are dealt with. Well, one of the things is what you would like to do in the future. So when doctors and patients are considering potential treatments in the future, well, how would that affect what your goal is? What, are you, how active do you want to be? So if we don't do this thing, will you still have the active life that you would like? Or if we do it, will it change your active life? And so the idea of always thinking about the past, the present, which is what we're dealing with right now, what's before us, what is the sort of urgent time sensitive issue, and then what is the long-term goal you have as a person, that those are really important elements for healthcare.
Professor, before we wrap up, one final question. You describe time as something that can actually be designed rather than simply managed. What's one immediate shift in how people communicate that could help them begin designing their time differently today?
Okay, that's a great question. So in terms of just uh redesigning your times, like something people can do today, it depends. I would say it depends on what their particular challenge is. So I'll name one, and then a couple of others. So the immediate shift, I guess, that would encompass all of them is to look at your biggest challenge. Is the challenge that you don't have enough, that you're not giving enough time to relationships, or that you aren't giving enough time to yourself, and so then you don't have really the energy and the state of mind that you need to give more time to your relationships and to a task. And so one immediate shift that you can take is to think about, am I designing in my day, in my week, in my quarter or year, am I giving a space to pause and to recuperate, whatever that means, with with the team. So I talked to a woman recently who, their team was undergoing some big changes, like the organization was expanding, and she said that even though like things were getting busier, they took a like a corporate retreat and went away and just talked and got to know each other better, talked about their concerns and the opportunities, and did some kind of like mission driven visioning kind of work. That is one thing that you can do today, is just to sort of audit your calendar and say, is there anywhere in my calendar an opportunity for me to pause, to not just be involved only in this task completion, which I might be really headed toward burnout, for me to pause and to build the relationship, even if it's just with one other person, whether it's with a client or with your coworkers, is taking a stock of your calendar. And we all usually we have our calendars with us wherever, either on our phone or in some paper version, and just looking at that is really important to then saying, okay, let's forget about time management and getting more done. Let's think about, am I getting the right things done? Am I missing key things that actually would support me in the long run?
Thank you, Dr. Ballard, for sharing these powerful insights on chronemic design and showing us how slowing down in our communication can actually help us achieve more meaningful speed. Your work challenges us to rethink not just how to manage time, but how we intentionally design it through the relationship and communication practices we build every day. We appreciate you joining us today and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the conversation and for the invitation to join you.
Thank you.